Tonight, something happened that analysts have been predicting and quietly dreading for 3 decades. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow corridor through which 1/5 of the world's oil passes every single day, became the center of a confrontation that didn't just threaten one country. It threatened the lights in your home, the price of groceries on your shelf, the stability of governments you've never thought about. I've spent years studying how economic pressure points become military flashpoints. And what I'm watching right now, on day 38 of the US-Israeli campaign against Iran, is not a new story. It's the oldest story in geopolitics. But the ending is still being written. I want to be clear about something before we go further.
I'm not going to tell you who's right or wrong here. That's not what this channel does. What I will do is show you the mechanisms, the real ones, the ones the headlines skip past, because understanding how we got here is the only way to understand where this goes. Here is the central argument of this video. The Strait of Hormuz crisis is not primarily a military confrontation. It is an economic siege, and the bill for that siege is arriving now, everywhere, all at once. Let's start with the geography because it matters more than almost anything else in this story. The Strait of Hormuz is roughly 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. 21 miles. You could drive that in less than 20 minutes on a highway, and yet, through that corridor passes approximately 17 to 20 million barrels of oil per day, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. That's the lifeblood of Japan, South Korea, India, much of Europe. It's the artery. And right now, that artery is being squeezed. Iran has not fully closed the strait, not in the technical sense. What it has done is something more sophisticated and, in some ways, more destabilizing. Ships are being charged transit fees, millions of dollars per tanker, to pass through a narrow corridor controlled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Some vessels are rerouting entirely. Others are simply sitting and waiting. The result, as Reuters and Bloomberg Economics have documented, is that Brent crude has risen above $110 a barrel, WTI above $113. Those are not numbers that stay in a trading room. Those numbers show up at the pump, in the price of plastic, in the cost of fertilizer that feeds crops that feed people. Now here is what the mainstream coverage keeps framing as a bilateral conflict, the U.S. versus Iran, when in reality the consequences have already gone regional and are threatening to go global. The UAE intercepted drones over Fujairah. Saudi Arabia shot down 2 unmanned aircraft of its own. A telecommunications building in Abu Dhabi was targeted. These are Gulf states that are not party to the conflict. They are not belligerents. And yet the fallout, literal and economic, is landing on their territory and their infrastructure. UAE Presidential Advisor Anwar Gargash said publicly that any settlement must guarantee passage through the strait, but also warned that a deal failing to address Iran's missile and drone programs would create, in his words, a more dangerous and more volatile Middle East. That is a remarkable statement from a country that prefers quiet diplomacy. It signals something important. The neighbors are beginning to panic. And then there is the deadline, the one everyone is watching. On Sunday, President Trump posted on Truth Social, in language that would be unthinkable from any previous administration in living memory, that Tuesday would be, as he put it, power plant day and bridge day for Iran. The deadline he set was 8 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. Iran has, according to Al Jazeera and multiple corroborating sources, rejected all proposals for a temporary ceasefire. Their position, conveyed through Pakistan as intermediary, is that they will only accept a permanent end to the war, not a pause. Trump, for his part, called their 10-point counter-proposal significant, but not good enough. Here is where I want to slow down, because what's happening in the next few hours is not just a military calculation. It is a pressure test of something called escalation dominance, the idea that one side can signal so clearly and credibly that it will always respond at a higher level that the other side backs down. Trump has used this logic repeatedly throughout this conflict. He set a deadline in late March. He extended it. He set another. He extended it again. He has now described tonight's deadline as final. But Iran has its own calculation. And this is the layer that most coverage misses entirely. The IRGC has publicly stated it will respond outside the region and deprive the U.S. and its allies of oil and gas for many years if civilian infrastructure is struck. That is not a bluff made for domestic consumption. That is a statement about Hormuz, a corridor that Iran does not merely border, but effectively controls militarily. They have the mines, they have the anti-ship missiles, they have the speedboats, and they have watched over 38 days of strikes, including hits on their heavy water facility at Kandab and strikes in residential areas of Tehran that have killed dozens of civilians, including children under 10 years old. They have watched all of that and have not capitulated. That tells you something about what they are calculating on the other side. The unintended consequence nobody is discussing openly is this. The very strikes designed to force Iran to reopen the strait may be hardening the Iranian political consensus around keeping it closed. Every residential building hit in Baharistan. Every child killed in Tehran. These are not abstractions in Tehran. They are political facts that make any Iranian leader who agrees to open Hormuz appear to be surrendering to military pressure that has killed their civilians. The optics inside Iran are not the optics being broadcast outside. Iran's President Pezeshkian has stated publicly that 14 million Iranians have answered a government call for volunteers to fight. Iran's parliament has passed a bill formalizing toll collection on Hormuz transit. These are not the moves of a government preparing to capitulate. These are the moves of a government preparing for a long fight. And in Israel, which is simultaneously conducting operations in Lebanon and responding to Iranian missile strikes on Haifa, Beersheba, and central Israel, there is a population under genuine strain. Israeli media have documented more than 10 sites hit in Haifa in a single night. A woman seriously injured by interceptor missiles in Petah Tikva. An economy absorbing the double shock of conflict and an oil market in crisis. So what are the actual options on the table tonight? Let me walk you through each actor's real choices and their costs. For the United States, Option 1 is to follow through on the strikes against power plants and bridges. The military plan reportedly exists and is ready to execute, according to sources cited by Axios and Fox News. The cost? The UN has warned this could constitute war crimes targeting civilian infrastructure. Senator Mark Kelly, a Democrat and combat veteran, said publicly that such strikes would be a black mark on the U.S. military. Domestically, polls indicate most Americans do not support military action in Iran, though Republicans broadly do. The risk of regional escalation, Iranian asymmetric retaliation worldwide, and a sustained oil shock are not hypothetical. Option 2 is to accept Iran's framework for a permanent end, something Trump has publicly said is not good enough. Option 3 is another extension which has happened before, and which erodes the credibility of every future deadline. For Iran, Option 1 is to accept a temporary framework and reopen the strait, which its parliament, its president, and its military have all publicly rejected. Option 2 is to absorb the strikes, retaliate asymmetrically, and count on the global economic pain to eventually fracture the coalition supporting the campaign. Option 3, the one almost nobody is modeling, is some form of private signaling that preserves public face while allowing a de facto reopening. This is how many Middle East crises have actually ended, not with signed agreements, with quiet understandings. For the Gulf states, they need the strait open. Their economies require it, but they cannot be seen publicly pressuring Iran. Their populations are watching. They are threading a needle between economic survival and political legitimacy. 4 scenarios for the next 72 hours, based on patterns documented in the historical record of Hormuz crises, and the current negotiating dynamics. First scenario, a deal is reached before the deadline, possibly through the Pakistan channel or through direct messages between Witkoff and Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi. This would likely look like an informal understanding rather than a signed agreement, and would probably not fully satisfy either side's stated demands. Markets would rally sharply. This remains possible but requires both sides to accept ambiguity they have publicly rejected. Second scenario, strikes on infrastructure go ahead. Iran retaliates, potentially mining the strait, targeting Gulf infrastructure, or activating proxy networks in ways that expand the conflict beyond Iran's borders. Oil markets spike dramatically. The IEA and EIA strategic reserves come under pressure. This scenario has the highest probability of pulling in actors who are currently observers. Third scenario, another deadline extension framed by the White House as ongoing negotiations. Markets partially stabilize. The underlying standoff continues. This has happened twice already in this conflict. Fourth scenario, internal developments in Iran, political, military, or popular, create a shift in Tehran's calculus that is not visible from the outside. This is the least modelable scenario, but historically the most common way entrenched positions have shifted in the Middle East. Now let me bring this to where it actually lands. Because you may be watching this from a country that has no military involvement in this conflict whatsoever, and you are already paying for it. The person I'm thinking about right now is someone who goes to fill up their car and notices the number on the pump is different than it was a month ago. Who goes to the grocery store and notices prices are quietly climbing, not dramatically, not all at once, but persistently. Who wonders why a conflict happening in a narrow strip of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula has anything to do with their kitchen table? Here is the connection. Modern economies are not insulated from each other. The shipping costs that rise when Hormuz is disrupted flow into the price of everything that moves by sea, and almost everything moves by sea. Fertilizers become more expensive, which means harvests cost more to grow. Oil becomes more expensive, which means plastic costs more to make, transport costs more to execute, heating costs more to sustain through winter. These are not dramatic shocks. They are quiet, grinding ones, the kind that take months to be fully felt, and we are 38 days in. The feeling I want to leave you with is not panic. It is something more useful, informed alertness. The kind that comes from understanding that the decisions being made in the next few hours, in Washington, in Tehran, in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, are not separate from your life. They are connected to it through systems that are older than any of the people currently threatening each other on social media. Let me close with what we actually know, stripped of the noise. 38 days into a U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran, the Strait of Hormuz remains disrupted. Oil prices are above $110 a barrel. Iran has rejected ceasefire proposals and demanded a permanent end to the conflict. Trump has set a deadline of 8 p.m. tonight Eastern Time, with threats to strike civilian infrastructure if Iran does not comply. The UN has warned those strikes could constitute war crimes. Iran's IRGC has threatened to deprive American allies of oil for years if red lines are crossed. The Gulf states are absorbing drone and missile threats of their own. And in the middle of all of it, 17 million barrels of oil a day sit in a 21-mile-wide corridor, waiting to see what happens next. History suggests that the most important decisions in crises like this are rarely made in public. They are made in back channels, through intermediaries, in language that lets everyone claim they didn't blink. Whether that happens tonight or whether tonight becomes something else entirely, we are about to find out. The question I'll leave you with is this. If the Strait of Hormuz remains disrupted for 6 more months, which country in your region is most exposed? And does your government have a plan for it? Think about that. Leave your answer in the comments. And if you found this analysis useful, you know what to do.